Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to have at the conference and at this session the CIO of General Motors for 6 months, Randy Mott. I think it's no lie, it's no exaggeration to say that Randy comes to GM at a crossroads in the company's storied history. So it's emerging from bankruptcy protection, a $50 billion government bailout, as well as some restructuring of the company. There's a line from The Shawshank Redemption that I'd like to channel here to describe what Randy's challenge is here at GM. It's get busy living or get busy dying. And I think GM is at the get busy living point of its transformation here. It's moving beyond survival mode and moving into innovation mode, moving into the next stage of its existence. And it brought in Randy to help lead that effort. Dan Ackerson, the CEO of General Motors, personally hired Randy for the CIO job. Now, I've known Randy since 1997, actually. InformationWeek visited Randy at Walmart's headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas, where Randy was the CIO. Randy spent 22 years at Walmart. He moved to Dell as CIO in 2000, then to Hewlett-Packard as CIO in 2005, and now to General Motors. So it's been a storied career for Randy. What he brings to GM now is what InformationWeek editors called the Randy Mott playbook. There are elements of what Randy has done at Walmart, done at Dell, at Hewlett-Packard, he brings to GM. It's not exactly the same, but the certain common themes here are data-driven decision-making, speed to market, getting projects done faster, more agility. When we did the profile of Walmart back in '97, we called Randy Speed Merchant because of his emphasis on delivering projects with speed. It's also about an efficient IT organization, cost efficient, so they're not fat IT organizations. But ultimately, it's about moving the dollars and the resources around to tackle innovation, to become more innovative, and to do less of what Randy calls the everyday business kinds of projects and work, and get on with the new development and the innovation. So welcome, Randy.
Thank you. Good to be here this afternoon.
So the IT transformation Randy is bringing to General Motors, he applied some of it at HP. It's a 3-year effort that began in June. And the one big difference from what you accomplished at Hewlett-Packard, and we'll go into the details of the transformation effort, but the big difference is you're not under a cost-cutting mandate at General Motors, and you were at Hewlett-Packard. Is that fair to say?
Well, the question is cost important always, but it's really more of an innovation mandate in terms of where we've been focusing the dollars that we do spend. So that would be correct in that sense, Rob.
Okay, so why don't you'll see the slide here. We have one slide, so it's a low-tech presentation, leaves more time for Q&A. We have a full hour here, so roughly 45 minutes up here on stage, 15 minutes for Q&A. But let's depart from the standard 45 minutes, and then the end is all the questions. I would ask the commentary desk. We're going to light you up throughout the entire
sounds
session
serious,
here.
Rob.
Yeah, we're going to light them up, and they're going to light us up, I'm sure. Anytime you have a question, just give me the high sign and chime in. There's a lot to cover here, and I would say the same thing for the audience. We have mic runners. You don't have to save them all up for the end. If we say something that you don't quite understand or just want us to elaborate, please raise your hand, and the mic runners will come around. Okay. So let's start with the insourcing that General Motors is doing. So sort of on an unprecedented scale, you came into an organization where 90% of the IT was handled by IT outsourcing companies, and only 10% roughly was handled by in-house staff. You're looking to flip that. 90 in-house, 10% outsourced. What's the rationale for that? Why you've never been a big fan of outsourcing, but why is it particularly important to make such I would say, a radical turnabout at General Motors?
Well, there's two parts of it. So when you think about the mix, there's certainly the insourcing versus outsourcing, but there's what do people spend their time on? And the challenge, as was actually mentioned earlier this morning, is 75% of the folks are actually spending their time on just running the day-to-day. So so even though the overall dollars is affordable on a scale of GM, is maybe to put it that way, not that every CFO doesn't want more dollars, right? But it's affordable, but inside that envelope, there's way too much time being spent on the running the business. So the first challenge is you've got to really change that mix. Okay, so the objective, as you know, was to say, we really ought to be 80% on innovation, 20% on run the business. And if you're going to make that kind of a pivot in terms of where your resources are spending your time, then you're faced with how do you do that? What's the best way to do it? And in my view, and it's been my view for some time on a number of these topics, as you've already mentioned, Rob. I'm glad you can keep up with it. If I change one more time, you may not be able to do that by memory. But anyway, no change planned right now. We'll see. But the real rationale is to say more of those people, though, that in terms of on the innovation, really need to be closely aligned with the business. The business, in our case, of designing, building, and selling cars. And if you're going to change processes, if you're going to change innovation, you're going to change capabilities, you want people that are close to the business and understand the business, because I've always believed, and I think I know, that the best way to make sure that you're adding value to the business, and Filippo said it in the session just before lunch, is you certainly have to understand the business, understand what you're trying to drive in the business. Certainly technology plays a role, and then leadership being kind of your influence both in IT and in the business. So those are key elements, and to do that, I think having folks that have a GM badge makes sense as you're migrating where and how and who does the work.
It's also about speed as well, correct? You said to Chris Murphy and me when we were up at GM headquarters in Detroit that with outsourcers, every major change is a new contract negotiation.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways contracts are done. So I'm not here to debate how simple or how hard you can make that world of contracting all of the innovation work. But the fact of the matter is, it does add a time element, and it's a time element that stands between what the business is looking for IT to deliver and when IT actually delivers it. And there's also a kind of a flexibility that goes away when you do that. So in terms of being able to move your resources around so that you're constantly responding to what the business needs or what's most important, as much as all of us have been, or at least a number of us have been in this industry for a long time, we all know that none of us do a perfect plan, and you need to make adjustments, and it does keep you from making those adjustments, and you end up following the contract as opposed to putting resources where they need to be to finish the most important project. So it's not a lot more complicated than that, quite frankly, but it is very important.
Yes, Seth.
Yeah, Randy, I wanted to ask you, you talk about this shift from 75% keeping the lights on, running the day-to-day business. Obviously a big change to 80% innovation. Are you changing staff dramatically in terms of the skill sets, the resources? How is that playing out?
Yeah, well, what we've said that we need to do, and it is, and I think these words, I think Fritz used these words earlier this morning. In a lot of ways, as it relates to IT, this is a $150 billion startup and $150 billion greenfield. So you have to say, if I was going to do it based on what I know now, what would I do? So to the question you just asked, is we've announced that we're going to do development centers. We're going to do multiple development centers in the U.S. that are going to cover where a lot of the talent is reachable, and it's reachable not just in terms of the professionals that are out there in the marketplace, but also the universities that actually have a lot of great talent. And we want to have a blend of bringing that freshness into these innovation projects, et cetera. So as we migrate, as we transition over what we've described kind of that mix that we're discussing as kind of a 5-year getting to the ultimate place. I mean, we've got a lot of the objectives, as Rob mentioned, that are 3 years in terms of getting the data centers consolidated, et cetera. So a lot of the movement is around the 3-year. The workforce mix is probably more like a 5-year horizon to get it kind of from the level it's at to the high level of a 90-10. Does that answer the question?
So the plan is to open 4 what you call innovation centers in the United States. You announced on Friday you're locating one in Austin, Texas.
Right.
The goal is to hire 500 people, software developers, business analysts, project managers, database experts. So these are the kinds of people you're bringing in. Yeah. Overall, how many IT folks is GM looking to hire? I'm not saying that you don't need to give me an exact number, but can you give me a sense of the scope of the hiring?
I think if you look at the innovation, it says you've clearly got to move a number of people out of that support role and either into innovation, or you transition those, in terms of these outsourcing deals over time. But today, when you look at that mix, you're roughly only 3,000 people in development. If you have a workforce that's approaching the 10,000 number, and you just do nice round numbers, I mean, you get to 8,000 people on an 80-20 mix. So you've got several thousand people to be hired over that time period. Now, part of the reason for the time period is we are looking for a large percentage, whether that's 25, 30, 35% of that workforce in each of those years being out of the college ranks. So we think it's a huge opportunity to bring kind of fresh perspective, fresh skills, and begin to train them and educate them, if you will, on how you design, build, and sell cars.
So those 4 skill sets I briefly covered, that's sort of what you're looking for here?
I think this group probably knows that list of skill sets better than either of us here to articulate them. But it's basically anyone involved in developing and innovating, and we have the full waterfront. We have everything from what many of us would call the legacy skill sets, which I guess I am one of those, if you will, in terms of when my career started, all the way to the latest things around cloud technologies and the things we're involved in that. So it's really everyone involved in creating those applications and those capabilities.
Jerry, did you have a question, or did we?
Yeah, I was just trying to understand, are you intending to grow the staff as well as change the mix of staff?
Well, I think you first have to start with, there's only roughly 1,500 people that have GM badges that do IT at GM. So the staff's growing. Okay, now a lot of the work, as was mentioned earlier, is handled with folks that are not part of that. They are part of shared services and other supplier entities that support the operation on a very, very large percent. So it is all grow the staff, okay, in our case, because we only have 1,500.
So if I can move on to another element of the playbook here. The goal is to move to one data warehouse across GM globally. So how many data marts do you estimate exist in various pockets of GM?
It's an interesting number because it fluctuates somewhere between 250 and 300 data marts, depending on which report I get which week. But it's roughly 250 plus data marts. It's siloed based on the way our business has been traditionally run. If you look at our current organization and the current way we're trying to approach the markets, it's much simpler and less complex than it's been in the past. But as many of you know, when you kind of look at the IT infrastructure and the IT systems that are there, it tends to reflect history as opposed to reflecting today. And in a historical mode, there's a lot of data silos that are part of that, and it makes it very hard to compare, contrast, and make like-bounded decisions on, in our business, where you make your investments, where you're growing market share, where you're doing well on attracting particular customer segments and particular segments of our vehicle plans. So, trying to get that to where it's both much more comprehensive, but it's also common in terms of how we look at it from business decisions.
And how long is that going to take? Is that a 3-year effort?
That's a 3-year. That's
Okay.
a 3-year. Yeah. So
Now, I'm going to quote, I've already given you this quote before, but the audience probably hasn't read it. Dan Ackerson, the CEO of General Motors, who comes from the telecom industry, so they know a thing or two about data as well. Data warehousing and customer information was not a strength at the company. Maybe it wasn't even existent, he told Fortune magazine. Is he being a little harsh there, or was this a real weakness of the company over the past several years?
I think it's like most companies. There was a lot of data. There was not necessarily a lot of information, and it was certainly not viewed holistically. So when you use the term, at least when I think of the term data warehouse, and I think many people in the audience think of it, you think about a kind of an end-to-end view of the elements of your business, and so it was certainly not end-to-end. It was much more fractured than that, and I think that's what he's reacting to in terms of how it was used as well as how it was deployed in the company.
Hey, another quote, we're going to be very, very data-driven rather than episodically driven. Is that what the same he was getting at, the fact that it was reactive rather than...
Yeah, I think what happens, and Filippo, I think, did a good job of pointing this out in his whole discussion around data analytics is, if you don't have a consistent picture that you're able to view and think about decisions across your whole enterprise, you end up kind of reacting to things that go wrong, as opposed to having kind of a cadence of good business decisions. So, so episodical. I don't know the episodes because I wasn't there, of course, right. But clearly that's not unusual for a lot of businesses that you end up reacting to things that surprise you, and that's really what you're trying to avoid with an enterprise data warehouse and good information. Is you don't want surprises. It doesn't mean that you don't still have hard business choices to make, but you don't want to. You want to do that as in at least a visible world, as opposed to getting surprised.
So can you give us an example, look ahead a little bit and say, all right, here's what we hope to be able to do with data that we were either unable to do or just didn't do before because the data was too hard to get at. So what are the kinds of sort of business decisions you see GM becoming better at than it was before?
Well, so I think it goes across a wide gamut, and I don't want to necessarily paint these as kind of the strategic things, but in taking them the same way as you just mentioned them as examples. So one of the things that's been talked about by our CFO is getting to where we have country of origin profitability, okay? Because we do share a lot of our supply chain, a lot of components that we transfer parts and supply chain and parts of vehicles from one country to the other. We cannot tell the profitability because those internal transfer prices get in the way of having a clear picture of the profitability of a particular geography and what that country's doing. We intend to have a part of this in play as we begin the new year. So that gives you a better visibility around where profits are being made, where problems are, and where they're not. Now, if you take that all the way to where I think you take it, is you get to VIN number profitability, and all of you, because you end up having to deal with that as your vehicles, know that that's down to the individual vehicle. We want to know what the profitability is of that, because implied in that is you now understand everything going back into that whole supply chain, manufacturing, design process that went into that vehicle, and the quality of your decisions across the whole kind of life, if you will, of that product. All the way through, not just coming off the dealer showroom floor, but also what happens to it as it relates to warranty, what happens to it as it relates to repairs. Those are elements that if you really wanted to understand the decisions you're making and how you want to impact those up and down the chain of the life, if you will, of a vehicle. So that's where we want to go. So that's kind of the level of detail we're trying to get after, and all the implications that go back through your different systems, and many of them are, anywhere from 40-year-old systems to systems that may have been deployed over the last 2 years.
Seth?
Yeah, Randy, I just wanted to ask you, so how has the business changed, and in terms of IT's relationship to the business as either seen as a back-end cost center supplier, as a partner, and how important is it that you have CEO sponsorship in terms of that integration?
Well, you're asking how it's changed. I mean, it's right now. It sounds good, right? I mean, so there's a certain element of, okay, this sounds like a good change. Is there a business having seen something different yet? Not yet. So I think the business understands that IT should be an enabler, should be a creator of capability, a implementer of streamlined processes, some driving of speed in the whole design, build, manufacturing side, and which is why this slide that you've got on your screen, this is targeted to the business audience. Now I've got other slides, and Rob and Chris and others have already kind of written about some of the elements we started out talking about, but this slide was particularly intended to the business audience, and not just the executive operating committee, but really everybody out in the business, because their world is going to change. Things are going to happen they don't like. He mentioned application reduction. You take an application away, somebody likes it, somebody's using it, somebody knows how to use it, and you're getting ready to tell them to do something different. So this was so there is a whole kind of communication and how do you make sure that they understand there is something in it for me. So I think at the executive committee they certainly understand that. At the board they understand that. But our challenge as an IT organization is to make sure that all the employees around the world understand that this is not a cost-cutting goal, although we've got to cut some costs in order to have some money to invest in other areas, but this is what can we really do to move the businesses forward, and that's the kind of the intent of the 10 items on this slide.
So you mentioned the application consolidation. So just to put some numbers on it, roughly 4,000 applications today across General Motors worldwide. The goal is to reduce that by 40%. Is that? And
40% is, it's a number.
Yeah.
It's if anything, it's a conservative number, because when you everybody has to look at their own business, and each of you are in different businesses and support different organizations. But in our business, we basically have the same business model around the globe. And today, we look more like 20% of our applications are global and common, 80% are not. You think about where it could be, and we talk about, why not 80% global and common, and that gets you to a number in that, 40% plus range of applications that if you had an application that took care of the business needs on a global basis and took care of all of the nuances as it related to the different markets that we're in, then do you need as many? And the answer is no. And the many is an element of cost in an IT organization.
And same for the data center consolidation. So 23 to 2, is that?
It's 22, large data centers down to 2, and again, it's a function of, where can you, when you think about technologies today, and whether you call it virtualization, whether you call it, sharing, whether you call it cloud, the common element in that is, in fact, trying to leverage things across many applications. Well, nobody has quite figured out how to do that very well whenever those things are continents apart. So the reality is you can, but you kind of add a lot of servers talking to server activity into it. So moving it down to a couple of data centers simplifies the environment, allows you to go to a much higher level of sharing, and drives a lot of efficiencies just in terms of how you manage those environments when both in terms of change as well as day-to-day monitoring and management.
And that money then can be reinvested to more innovative development.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Mike, you have a question.
Randy, how do you make these decisions? Like, how do you? Is it? Hang on. Is it? Oh. Is it? No, I didn't. I wasn't making that dart thing. That was my colleague here. Seriously, do you bring in a lot of consulting and go through a lot of analytics and benchmarking when you first joined the company, and did you come in with sort of no preconceived notion, and do you sort of base it on a lot of data collection, or once you get in, do you get a feel for what's going on there and really I guess I'm not saying how much of this is gut feel, but really how much of this strategy, because it's completely transformational to the organization. And so how much of that just comes from your experience and you're getting to know the management team and the strategy and the business?
Well, and I've said this before, and I used to say this in forums with customers, but now I get to be one, so that's kind of nice actually. But it does start with the data, okay? And I have I have a view of the amount and the level of information that I want to understand about IT. So for me, I have to get it in my terminology. So if there's a bias that I have, it's I want to know how many applications you got, and by the way, I want to know how many data marts you got, and I want to know how many data feeds you've got, and those are 3 questions, of which on whether it's day 1, day 2, day 3, that we didn't have an answer. Well, let's go get it. I mean, so it's not that somebody in the organization didn't know it for their area, but to look at it in total, it's just not the way they were looking at it. And they had outside groups that had been in and had done some analysis. So you take those things, you take it with the data you want to get, and you task the organization literally over the course of really the first, March, April, May. The first 90 days, it was an organization that at least the senior leadership and a number of the individuals right below them were spending their time answering questions. And I literally have a 200-page deck that's got a lot of data in it, and it's categorized. But but again, and in my view, I think the data takes you to an answer. This people in this room and folks that have been doing this like yourselves and all of us, you know a lot about what some of the right answers and wrong answers are, but knowing how to interpret that for the company you're dealing with or the situation or the task at hand is understanding it in enough detail about that company. And so that's really kind of what drove it. So for example, I knew outsourcing dollars, okay? I didn't know outsourcing FTEs. So to try and understand what was causing those dollars took some work. I had locations. I knew they were in some places, but I didn't know where those FTEs were by location. So, and I'm not trying to say that's all. I mean, there's 100 of those kind of questions. Half of them, the answer to which doesn't change anything that you do because it's not relevant. Half of them are relevant, and 20 of those are really important. And I think to me that's how a strategy evolves. It's not it's not a playbook that shows up from some popular names that we know in this industry that says, okay, here's the playbook, this is what you do. I think it starts with what's the information that's relevant to this company, to this entity, to this organization, and then the facts, I think, drive the strategy. Because there's a where you're at, and then there's a where it's possible to be. I mean, there's another G company. I don't know if anybody's here from them, but there's another G company called GE that is a very different company than GM because they have a wide range of very different businesses. Okay, at GM we have a business. Okay, we build cars. Okay, that gets you to different conclusions than if you're a diversified large entity like GE, just as an example, and I use them just because similar size and scale. Okay.
Seth?
Yeah, Randy, just, you talked about the 80-20%, and the 20% in terms of data centers, in terms of having those infrastructures, are you looking at having that served up more as a service in the cloud environment of today, or are you spending time actually looking at infrastructure and components that you want to build on?
Well, it's a little of both. So part of it is deciding what's your technology stacks, okay? And in the current state of the industry, I don't think it's a stack. I think at least in our environment, when you mix in a number of the kinds of applications, both from suppliers that we have, as well as custom, as well as across 4 decades of technologies, you try to get down to, 3 or 4 stacks. Okay, 3 or 4 stacks to many of you may sound like a lot, but that's versus 200. So that's pretty good in terms of synergy, and the size gives you some scale. So I think there's certainly some structural stacks, but on top of that, then I think what's important in our case is you put some common monitoring, some common controls, some common overall operating software on top of it, because in a lot of companies there's not a lot of automation that's happened in the IT world. It's happened for the business in some cases, but in this case, it's you don't make that mix happen by telling people to go faster. There's nobody not necessarily not going fast on purpose, right? You do it because you got to make work go away. You make work go away by simplifying the environment, simplifying the number of applications, simplifying the data centers, but then automating those things that can be automated. And in our world, a lot of things can be automated, kind of back to the very first speaker of the day. So,
in terms of going faster, so one of the elements of your plan is go faster, deliver projects faster, and it's not, just work smarter. It's what? It's about putting more people on projects, doing fewer of them.
Yeah, there's two kind of, I view them as common sense kinds of things, as having done as much of this wrong in the past as I've done right. So you learn things, sometimes the hard way, sometimes easy. But there's a couple things. One is, there's nothing about an IT project that time makes better. Okay. The only thing that's going to happen is something's going to change, something's going to go wrong, something's going to interrupt it. So, if you believe that time doesn't help you at all, then you need to shorten it. The other thing that doesn't make it better is the more things you do just means you have more people in rooms talking about what you're doing as opposed to doing it. So there's a balance of how many active projects you do, and this gets misinterpreted, I think. In some dialogues that I get into, it's not that I want to do fewer projects in a year, okay, which is why I put the bullet on there for the business folks to say, I want to triple the number of projects we do, okay, but I don't want to triple the number of projects I'm working on at any point in time. I actually want the number that I'm working on at a point in time. So it really is about, get the project done as fast as it can get done. And different projects have different speeds, okay? It's not like you can put 100 people on a project. There's a limited number of people that make sense to put on a project, but whatever that number is that makes sense, then max it out. In other words, fully resource it so you get done. There's another element of that says when you finish it, the business actually starts to get business value. And in my view, the more times they get business value, it also changes the innovation feedback loop, because when you give them something that they wanted, you do it exactly like they wanted you to do it. And guess what? As soon as they get it, they go, wow, now that I have this, it would be great if we could do this. The problem is you don't get the second piece of that innovation question a lot of times unless you deliver part number one. And then the other, so discipline around how many projects you run at a time. It's gated a lot by how many resources you can apply, and there's a whole skill set mix in there that's going to determine which projects you can do. And then you try to drive to actually plan those to where you understand the intersections. Last point on that, just to answer it around the portfolio is this is the most complicated thing that happens in most businesses, and we think we don't have to plan it in advance. Okay, so for some reason we think we have to plan the financial plan before the year starts, but in too many companies you don't plan the IT plan before the year starts. You kind of make it up as you go. In my mind, that's a great recipe for failure. So backing the planning process up to where you know what projects you're going to work on for the year. So I have a plan. I reviewed it last week with the Executive Operating Committee around this is what it looks like in terms of the portfolio. We're late. I happen to think that you do the next year's plan depending on when your year starts, but you try to have that done 4 to 5 months before the the year starts, because otherwise, how do you have the resources? How do you have the software? How do you have the infrastructure? How do you do that? Well, you spend your first 6 months doing all the things you should have planned before you tried to embark a bunch of people on it. So it's really a planning process, and then try to plan the year, because at least, again, my view is, at least the companies I've worked in, there's a lot of integration between different parts of the IT application set, and if you don't coordinate that across a large number of projects, they become the kind of the Achilles heel on why things take too long, because somebody wasn't ready, or somebody turned right, or somebody didn't know you were coming this fast.
Now every project, and that's every IT project that gets done, is subject to a rigorous cost-benefit analysis, and that you try to place a figure you call the revenue of IT on each project. Can you explain that a little bit? What exactly? You're doing this with the finance folks, you're doing this with the business units and the IT. These are numbers they all agree on.
Right.
What exactly is the revenue of IT that you try to apply to each project?
And if you're going, there's two parts. I mean, you can have IT as a cost, and this is what it costs to do IT, and that's your only choice, okay? And so this is what it costs you. That's one way. Or you realize that IT is made up of two different parts. It's the run the business, and it's the innovation. And guess what? The innovation is discretionary, okay? And that discretionary spend has to be evaluated like you look at other discretionary resources in the company, like capital, for example. And I view, quite frankly, the IT portfolio and capital that a company invests in a very similar way. So if that's going to be the premise, then projects need to have a return on investment. They need to do a cost-benefit analysis. But you have to, I think, at least in my my dealings, I think you have to break it down to where it can be absorbed. And a good simple way to think about it is, when you put a project in, what's the direct benefit you get from that project for the first 12 months it's in? And I think about it in terms of annualized benefit, and again, that one is, Mike, a little more of experience. You try a bunch of ways of presenting things that don't work to executive committees, and you get changed over time. But so I don't look at it for a 5-year return on investment, even though the finance guys do that and the teams do that. But when you show up at the executive committee, we talk about it in terms of, here's the annualized benefit of this portfolio for each of the different executive areas based on the projects that have been prioritized. But to your point, it's cost-benefit analysis, annualized benefit, and it gets signed off on not by the IT guys, although the IT guys sign off on it as well, but the important sign-offs are the business and the controllers within that business. And it, and when you first ask them to do that, everybody's going like, no, I'm not sure this has that benefit. And you go, kind of go to both sides of that guardrail. But it's important, and it's important that you do it on every project, because in my mind, it scales. It doesn't take long to do a cost-benefit analysis on a very simple project. It takes more time on a more complicated project.
A critic of yours at HP, so he was in your IT organization. I don't know where he sat, but he wrote me a note. He called them soul-crushing metrics. That it just added a lot of bureaucracy, a layer of bureaucracy that was unneeded. Is there the potential for that if it's not managed properly?
Well, I don't think so. And what it is clearly business-driven decision-making for IT. And there are companies in this country, in this state, in this world, that being an artist is part of the job. In my mind, in supporting a for-profit business, that's not it. And so if you don't have if what you want to do doesn't align with supporting the business, these metrics are going to crush you, because you will not get your project done, because it will come to the light of day. Now, that said, there are plenty of projects we do. There are plenty of the projects on the board right now that we will do that don't have a direct benefit, because an executive operating committee member says, we need to do this because this is important information, or this is an important tool for our employees, this is an important tool for our dealers, this is an important tool for our customers. And we know there's not a direct benefit to it, but we believe it's important. And somebody at a business level gets to make that decision, and everybody gets transparency on it. But someone in the IT group doesn't get to decide, I really like to do this project with my, partner that is, running this small group there. You really want that to be made at the same governing body that governs other scarce resources in a business. And from that standpoint, yeah, it's if you've not been used to operating that way, it may seem very constraining, but it's constrained, in my view, around the business objectives.
So it helps prioritize in the process. Which are the most important?
It helps prioritize, and it puts, and I think, and this is, as I talk to IT teams, and as you think about how do you motivate your IT teams, it is hard. Every business, or at least most for-profit businesses, have a lot of goals, and they talk about their revenue, and they talk about their costs, and they talk about their profit. Okay, and IT is the area that has the most complexity, has the hardest work to do in a lot of cases, and all you get to talk about is cost. Well, there's just something about that doesn't feel right. So kind of the revenue of IT is important because you're only doing projects because they have a benefit, so getting a consistent way that works for the organization to do that. You do have a cost, and then clearly you want to be paying for yourself. You want to be self-funding as it relates to what you're returning to the business for IT in total. I think IT is one of the few areas, the few investments a company can make to where you actually can pay for the whole thing with what you deliver every year, not some years, but every year if you get your balance right.
So yes, Jerry?
So, Randy, my interpretation of that, though, is that you're putting the nix on speculative projects, experimentation, which ultimately can be the genesis of real innovation, and you'll end up being a follower, not a leader.
Okay, well, just watch. But no. I mean, I understand how you could get to that interpretation, but what you really want to do is there are plenty of bread and butter projects, okay, and your hurdle rate needs to allow for projects that are investment projects. They are driving strategic paths, so they're going to be lined up with a strategic path. You may not be able to tie direct benefit to them. I've got a number of projects in the portfolio right now that was reviewed with the executive committee that they don't have a direct benefit, but they're okay because they believe they're directionally important things to be investing in. So I think it takes IT out of being viewed in the category that everything you're doing is a crapshoot, to use the terminology. I don't know if that comment was right or not, but into, it's balanced, okay, because there's clearly things that have, maybe they are follower, but their process changes, their productivity things that are very deliberate, and people are happy to put a signature on. And then but then that leaves room for other parts of the portfolio to be investing in, kind of creating the future, and you may not know all the answers yet.
So that's a happy clarification. I like that better.
Okay.
Yes, Seth.
Yeah, Randy, you talked about interesting numbers of about 35% of the people you're going to hire in these development centers being new college grads. We've had a lot of discussion in the last couple of years about labor and what kinds of people for what types of jobs in new IT. And I just find that an interesting number. How do you plan to utilize these folks who don't have a lot of experience? Are you looking for them to bring new waves of technology, or are you going to basically foster an R&D type environment? Interested to hear what you plan to do with them.
Okay. Well, so I don't know what, I've had, I have had the luxury of a lot of different experiences, and from year one on the job at Walmart, I had a college hire show up to help me. So from, whatever that is, for 33 years, I've not known an IT organization that didn't have an influx of some number of college graduates as a part of the way the workforce was built and grown and developed. So I'm looking for a high level of energy, and that's what I get. Okay, 33 years, I get energy. Okay, whenever I see when college graduates show up to work, you get energy. I get people who don't know what they don't know, and they don't know that something's not possible. And they immediately, within a very short time, they rewrite the rule book of how long it takes somebody to do something because they don't have any limits. You give them something to do, they don't know that they're supposed to take a week on it instead of a day. Okay, and then I think you look at what we do. I mean, we really ask our IT team, regardless of what role they're in, whether they're in operations or whether they're in infrastructure or whether they're in the development area, you really ask them to continue to hone their skills and redevelop their skills. So there's at least in my experience, there's constantly a high degree of learning involved in IT. Well, that college graduate learns just as fast as the other guy on a lot of those things, which means you're giving up nothing. Okay, in fact, if anything, you got some value out of the other. And then you also want to put them around experts, though. Okay, I happen to have, again, had the luxury, if you will, of being around some really smart IT people across the time that I've been in this profession. And you learn a lot faster from experts than you learn from not. So, if I think about skills, I think hire experts and hire college grads, okay? And you'll drive a very productive workforce. And, oh, by the way, great people like to work around other great people. So, that also helps in the retention side of that. But it is a balancing act. And, it's also been my experience that you got to force people to hire college grads because their typical spec is a 7-year person that's got exactly the 7 things I'm looking for. Never mind that there may not be only 4 of them on the planet. They can't do their project without it. So, you got to get your leadership team and your development leaders, et cetera, past that mindset. But again, that starts by having enough experts around where you facilitate learning. So yeah, you'll do the training things and that, but at the end of the day, people learn from people who are great at what they do, and that's the reason for the number. You want some scale in your development centers so that you've got a fair number of the right kind of skill sets that you want to be expert in. But it is work, but it is work with a very high productivity return in my mind. So,
why don't we open the questioning to the
audience?
audience?
Let's see if there's anybody out there, since I can't see
anyone?
them up here. There is somebody.
Right up front here.
Randy, what you've been with several large enterprises in the CIO position. Can you describe a little bit and contrast the differences from large organization to large organization to where you are now, and what are some of the challenges of changing the culture? You mentioned some things that you're doing, certainly, but what are the other things that you see in joining GM with a different culture that started now that from its past, and how do you overcome that in IT?
Okay, so I guess maybe a clarifying point. So I've worked for a really small company, okay, and kind of every company in between in my 22 years at Walmart. I started out, they were $500 million in revenue, had 40 people in IT total. That was all of us. We could see each other in a room. I left and they were $167 billion. So, I think I have a sense of kind of the small to medium to large. So you're right, the large. But the culture to me that are key is, IT professionals want to have a sense of accomplishment. Okay, and sense of accomplishment in a for-profit business is pretty laid out, and you got everybody around you that's talking about revenue. They're talking about their profitability. They're talking about what they're doing in terms of market share. They're talking about what they're doing to increase their margin. And, IT doesn't necessarily have a language that they can then relate to that accomplishment that resonates with the business. So I think from a cultural standpoint, it's more of an IT culture than a GM culture. It's to get the IT culture aligned with the GM culture. There's a GM culture there that very much wants to sell cars, build cool cars, make a better margin on those cars, gain market share on those cars. So that they're having they're having a pretty fulfilling conversation. We just aren't participating as much in it as we could. So I see it as getting us aligned with the business excitement that's already there and getting credit for it. Because to me, part of the whole rigor around a CBA process is, could you still get to the right list of projects without having a CBA? Probably. Could you get any credit? I don't think so. Okay, it's going to be worth whatever somebody decides to say in a meeting in a sidebar on, the IT folks aren't, they cost too much and they didn't deliver anything that mattered. Well, there's got to be some balance of that. So the culture to change is to give them ownership, and it's also a culture to expect them to know as much about the business as the business partners. Okay, Filippo said that a lot on stage, right before lunch. But, to me, it is around those three elements, and expecting, and back to the hiring, the question that came up earlier around graduates, you want to hire graduates that care about technology and they care about business, and there are plenty of them out there that like both, and offering them a balance is a good thing. Well, if you do that, then you want to also align what they do and what they contribute and what you can talk about in terms of their accomplishments, whether it's talking about a project or whether it's talking about the accomplishments of the year to the business. So I think it's aligning the IT culture to the business culture, because I think most businesses have a pretty healthy business culture.
Time for one or two more questions. Anyone? Back here.
Wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on number 7 on your list, which was extreme integration.
Okay.
Just what it means to you, Randy, and what it means to GM.
Well, I think Fritz alluded to this morning, but so to me, the real, when you talk about a company that offers kind of more than one thing and tries to do more than one thing, which I'm guessing 99.9% of the people in this room, they do. Part of how effective you are is in how well those processes and those applications are integrated. So I see integration is you figure out how to take what you're doing and leverage it very specifically to what you do and what you offer in the market, and you look for those opportunities of leverage is really around integration. That's one part. The second part is there's a lot of things in our environment, and I'm guessing in some of your environments, probably not all, probably a lot of you don't have much of this at all, but there's a lot of things called shadow IT, where somebody has decided that, I can go contract this service and I'll stick it up out here and it'll run just fantastically on its own without integrating well with anything else. Well, if you don't have a goal of things being well integrated, then that looks okay. So part of that is also to say it's really not okay, because you're not leveraging kind of the rest of the company or the rest of the processes or the rest of the things you're doing. So it's really around both of those, and it's just, again, to me, as you look at, whether you think about supply chain to manufacturing, whether you think about design to manufacturing, whether you think about all of the things that have touch points and have implications, to me, how well those are integrated, how well those are integrated as it relates to how you move things through that planning process or design or build process, those are very important. And then also the information, so you've got full visibility on what the implications are, as I mentioned, from understanding that decisions that get made in design, what does that cost in manufacturing? Things that get done in manufacturing, what impacts does that have on warranty? I mean, there's just all of those things that, to pretend that there's such a thing as a standalone system in IT in 2012 is just that. It's pretending. So they're integrated, and your planning and your design and your architecture has got to not forget it. So
We have time for one more question.
Jim Coca with Spirit Aerosystems. You know what? GM was kind of the pioneer in the outsourcing, only they did it when they purchased EDS, right, in the mid-'80s.
I read those stories, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a tumultuous period, as I recall. But so I know your number 3 there was 10x business value, which was kind of getting a lot of play. There's a book by that name, too. How long do you see this transformation taking? I mean, it's taken about 20 years or more for GM to get where they are with the current model. How fast do you see this coming together and really getting that value that you're talking about?
You know, I think most of it and most of the metrics on that slide are all intended to be 3-year goals. Okay, some of the other metrics we've talked about in terms of the mix kind of getting sorted out is a little longer, but the metrics on that slide, it's 3 years, and that's what we're building plans to. So.
Okay, Seth, we're out of time, but go, one more.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, Randy, just, you've had this interesting career as CIO of several large companies and seen them grow. How has your job changed in the CIO world from managing data centers to what you're expected to participate in terms of strategy today in the business?
Well, I think it's changed the way probably most people in the room's jobs have changed. You know, IT used to, only touch a small portion of the businesses that we support and run, at least kind of going back even prior to CIO days, right, in terms of kind of back office and some of the terminology that was used earlier in the day. So you know, it used to be that it was not pervasive. So in terms of how's it changed, it's much more important that you understand kind of all of the business, because all of the business is touched by IT, and all of the employees inside of a company tend to be dependent on a high level of IT in terms of doing their job. So it's really been a IT becoming more pervasive in terms of how it's used in businesses. And I don't think that's particular to me. I think we've all had to deal with that. And what that means then is more of your time is spent over on the business side, understanding the business, making sure that the things you're doing are really addressing the pressures of the business. Because as much as you may want to do in terms of project portfolio and prioritization, the reality is you got to be out there understanding what your business partners are really faced in terms of with pressures, and make sure that there's something on your list of things to do that's at least aligning to that. So I think it's a lot more time doing that, and that could be a function of the fact that I don't know how to do hardly any of the technical jobs anymore, so I couldn't help there if I wanted to, But anyway, whatever the reason I got there, but that's the way the time is.
Sorry, we're out of time, Randy. Okay. Thank you very much for informative. That was terrific. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.